So, how can a U.S. sanction against just one government official trigger a potential financial meltdown for 220 million people? That's the absolutely mind-boggling question at the heart of what's happening in Brazil right now. Let's get right into it.
Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the sanctions rulebook, what the rules of this game even are. Then, we'll zoom in on the political drama unfolding in Brazil. After that, we'll see the incredible financial tightrope this creates. And finally, we'll lay out the massive, high-stakes choice the country is facing.
Okay, so first things first. To really get what's going on, you have to understand the playbook. And that playbook starts with a pretty powerful piece of U.S. law called the Global Magnitsky Act.
So what is it? Put simply, this law gives the U.S. government the power to go after specific people or companies abroad that it says are involved in major corruption or human rights abuses. It's meant to be like a surgical strike, not a carpet bomb.
So how does one of these sanctions actually work in the real world? Well, it's a domino effect, really. Step 1, any assets the target has in the U.S. get frozen instantly. Step 2, all American citizens and companies have to cut ties. But Step 3 is where the real global power comes from. Even non-U.S. banks play along because they are terrified of losing access to the U.S. dollar. And that leads to Step 4. If you're caught helping the sanctioned person, you could get sanctioned too.
You might be wondering, why does a U.S. law have so much clout internationally? Here's a great way to think about it. Imagine global finance is just a giant plumbing system. Because the U.S. dollar is so dominant, the U.S. basically controls all the main pipes. If they decide to turn off your water, you're done. You're cut off from pretty much everything.
All right, with those rules in mind, let's see how this is all playing out in Brazil. It's time to meet the key figures who are right in the middle of this storm.
You've basically got four main characters in this drama. The man at the center is Alexandre de Moraes, a very powerful Supreme Court justice in Brazil. He's the one the U.S. sanctioned. Trying to manage the crisis is Brazil's current president, Lula da Silva. The whole reason Moraes is in the spotlight connects back to cases involving the former president, Jair Bolsonaro. And then, to throw a wrench in things, the Trump administration in the U.S. decided to escalate, slapping huge 50% tariffs on Brazilian goods. So it started as a targeted action, blew up into a massive trade dispute.
So how did Brazil respond? Well, with open defiance. A statement from the court attributed to Justice Moraes himself pretty much said, "We're going to ignore the sanctions and just keep working." It's a bold stance, framing it as a defense of their national sovereignty. But here's the thing. That political defiance, it creates a huge, immediate, and very real problem for Brazil's entire financial system. It basically puts every bank in the country on an impossibly thin tightrope.
I mean, just look at this dilemma for a Brazilian bank. It's a total catch-22. If they follow the U.S. rules, they don't get punished by the U.S., and they keep access to dollars. Great, right? But then they're breaking their own country's laws. On the other hand, if they listen to their own government and ignore the sanctions, they risk getting completely exiled from the global financial system. There is no good option here.
Naturally, with this much pressure, the rumor mill started churning. A lot of people were asking, okay, is the U.S. secretly targeting a specific Brazilian bank to make an example of them?
And the answer is no. For now, the sanction is just on one person, Justice Moraes. But remember that material support rule we talked about? Because of that, every single bank in Brazil is now walking on eggshells, terrified they might accidentally provide a service to him and get caught in the crossfire. It creates this chilling effect across the entire system.
You know, this brings up a really interesting question. The U.S. isn't alone in having these kinds of tools. So here's a knowledge gap for you to think about. What do the sanction programs in the European Union or the U.K. look like? Are they as powerful as the Global Magnitsky Act? How do they compare? It's worth looking into.
And that leads us to our final and frankly most alarming section. What are the potential consequences if this standoff keeps getting worse? Because the stakes for Brazil are just unbelievably high.
See, Brazil's biggest vulnerability is that it's deeply connected to the global economy. Take a look at these numbers. The country imports 95% of the ingredients for its medicines, 85% of the fertilizer for its massive agricultural sector, 70% of its refined petroleum. Getting cut off from global trade isn't some abstract threat. It means the supply of medicine, food, and fuel could literally just stop.
And then there's this number, $280 billion. That's how much of Brazil's own national savings, its foreign reserves, are sitting in banks and investments that could be frozen with the flip of a switch. If that happens, the country's ability to pay for anything from abroad is just gone.
So here's our second analogy, and it's a powerful one. If the global financial system is a giant spider's web, the U.S. is the spider sitting right in the center. The system is so interconnected that they can feel every little vibration, every transaction, every attempt to move money. There's almost no way to hide.
So what would this actually feel like for a regular person in Brazil? Well, experts have mapped out a hypothetical timeline for a digital blackout, and it is terrifyingly fast. Week 1, U.S. banks cut ties. The local currency plunges. Week 2, tech companies like Amazon and Microsoft start pulling their services from Brazilian banks. Week 3, Google and Apple could remove banking apps from their stores. By week 4, the whole system of credit cards and digital payments could just start to collapse.
And believe it or not, it gets worse. Analysts warn of a total destruction toolkit that could be deployed. We're talking about sanctioning Brazil's entire banking sector, kicking them off the SWIFT international payment system, seizing all those reserves, and even making their biggest exports, like soy and coffee, commercially toxic, meaning nobody in the world would dare to buy them.
And that leaves us with one last knowledge gap to chew on. This situation went from a very specific sanction on one guy to huge tariffs on the whole country. So how often does the U.S. actually use these two very different tools, sanctions and tariffs, at the same time? And what kind of message does it send when they do?
In the end, it all comes down to this one incredibly difficult question for Brazil's leaders. Do you defend the principle of sovereignty for one official, or do you protect 220 million of your citizens from a potential economic catastrophe? It's a brutal choice, and the answer will absolutely define Brazil's future.